Bob, welcome. I should say welcome back because we actually had the pleasure and honor to host you here almost 3 years ago.
3 years ago, or so.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a while.
So it's fair to say that it's been a fairly eventful last 3 years, pretty amazing last 3 years.
Yeah, it's been a ton of fun. It's actually, I think, gone faster in some ways than I might have anticipated it going, and it's been a whirlwind really to see to just see the response from customers and growth and everything.
Very cool, very cool. So we're gonna get into all of this, but maybe for level setting. So Snowflake is built as the cloud, the data warehouse for the cloud, which offers plenty of advantages in terms of scalability, concurrency, simplicity, cost, all those things. So I guess when you were here last, you were a Series B company. Mm-hmm. You've raised quite...
C, yeah, my B or B, C.
Yeah, I think you were right before that C round with... Altimeter?
Altimeter, yeah.
It was a C round. But then you went on to raise even more money. I guess you guys by now have raised close to $500 million.
Just under, yeah.
Yes, including a big round led by Sequoia.
Yeah, Sequoia joined us, and so we just closed a round that was just north of $260 million raised.
Amazing. At a $1.5 billion valuation reported, which makes you officially a unicorn.
Official unicorn. We like to think of ourselves as a humble unicorn. Okay. Actually, that's our way of thinking about it. We're humbled to be one, but we really are focused on our customers. So that's all that matters.
Not valuation?
No, really, it's all about because it's really all about. Ultimately, it is all about customers and customer adoption. It turns out, we're in the SaaS business, and one of the things we're a database, a data warehouse as a service, but we run as a SaaS service. So we do everything. Customers load data, they run queries, Snowflake does all the rest for them. And as I sort of say, you earn your trust when you run a service, you earn the trust of your customers every single day of the week. And that's the way we think about it, is customers are trusting us with their data, and we're a tool that allows them to get insight from it.
Great. So maybe let's start at a high level and let's talk about the state of the cloud. So it's sort of amazing when you think about it as you look at the numbers somewhere. But last quarter, AWS reported a $10 billion run rate, growing at 45%. And then Microsoft Azure reported a $7 million run rate, accelerating at 98%. So it's incredible to see multi-billion-dollar businesses that continue to not just scale, but accelerate as they scale. What does that mean to you in terms of where we are with the cloud?
Well, I think we're at that point in adoption where we're seeing mainstream organizations really begin to adopt the cloud in a big way. When I was here 3 years ago, this was very early still. There were early adopters that had gone into the cloud in a big way, and that's really who we sold to. What we found was the initial customers that we saw in the cloud, which was a combination of companies that had already adopted the cloud and had a lot of data that they cared about. They tended to be in industries like advertising, media, entertainment, online gaming. And then we started to see SaaS companies begin to adopt Snowflake as well. But all of those were non-traditional enterprise companies. And what we're now seeing is really the traditional enterprises move. And that seems to be pretty ubiquitous. Almost every organization we talk to has some cloud strategy associated with their IT. And most are actively moving. I mean, if you were 18 months ago, people were talking about and committing to move to the cloud. Now people are doing it. And we're even seeing that in regulated industries such as financial services. And I think that's a little bit more challenging for those organizations because they need to. I was meeting with a British firm yesterday, and they were talking about the fact that the British regulators in Britain were a bit behind where they are in the United States. And so they were talking about some of their concerns there. However, they're still going. I mean, it's still in their plan to do that. So we're seeing it pretty broadly right now.
And I think I saw some numbers that maybe you guys pointed out that showed that if you compare the cloud adoption to the client-server era, most of the wealth creation and value creation happened in the second decade. Mm-hmm. I think the numbers were that Microsoft grew to $1 billion in its first decade, but then ended its second decade at 24 billion.
Yeah.
And then Oracle grew to 1 billion in its first decade, but ended its second decade with 16 billion. I mean, is that the same thing happening here?
I think, though, that you're going to have to compress that decade. I mean, I don't think it's a decade. I think it's more like a 5 to 7 year period. And, we can almost think about Amazon finishing that first period now, because it was, 2008 when they launched? So it was, I guess, 10 years ago in that sense. It was 10 years ago. In a way, that way it was a first decade. But it's very much ahead of us. I mean, the growth will all be ahead of us. So, and I think we'll see it grow faster for sure. It's gonna grow faster than client server did.
So what happens in the next 3 to 5 years? Is just more growth, more companies embracing it?
I think the thing that people have not really grasped fully is what a major sea change it is when an organization can work with data and make that ubiquitous across the organization. I think it's almost impossible for an organization, it's very difficult to imagine in a situation where the affordability is there and the solution sets are there for an on-premises or an organization that's running on-premises to be data-driven across their entire organization. I think it's just very difficult to orchestrate that because the technology doesn't support it very well. And so it's a massive amount of IT work and quite a lot of cost to enable an entire organization to be data-driven. And very, very few companies have the ability to do that in the on-premises world. The cloud changes that totally because of the elasticity and the pricing structures that are possible in the cloud. We now bill at a per second level of granularity, and we have one customer that every Friday afternoon goes from a relatively modest amount of continuous usage of Snowflake to literally thousands of nodes running simultaneously, and that happens in about a 5-minute period. They run it that way for about 3 hours, and then they drop it all back down. That would be impossible and unaffordable in an on-premises world. And the thing that I think is most interesting here is that I think there is a huge cultural dynamic that will come from this because the siloed nature of data and the limitations of existing technology have made data a source of power in some senses within an organization. So people have this tendency to take data and pull it towards them and use it for advantage in terms of how they operate inside an organization. And I think that's a relatively dysfunctional thing, but it's one that is quite common because of the nature of the technology and the limitations. When all of a sudden data is a resource that is available to any person within an organization that has appropriate security privilege to access it, you can have a massive cultural shift in that. Because very, very few organizations, even if they think they're data-driven, really are making most of their decisions in a data-driven way. If for no other reason than it's just too darn hard. It's just too darn hard to do it. And if those obstacles can be removed, I think the cultural dynamics of the way people can work together are very, very different. And I think that's maybe the most, if you ask me what's sort of most exciting, I think it's the cultural shift that we will see as organizations become data-driven. And that will only be enabled because of the cloud.
It's sort of amazing, right? Like we in the startup world have been talking about, data and big data for so long that now even talking about big data feels like you're a has-been because it feels like 3 years ago, right? But the rest of the world is basically just starting to embrace
very, very little usage of it.
It's like this concept of like digital transformation, which is amazing to me. That isn't that what all of us have been doing for the last 30 years?
Well, it's a journey that I don't think ever totally ends. I mean, it certainly won't end in my career, and I think it's one where you're always at a certain point in time. And the thing that is amazed me. I mean, I run this company, and we try and be as data-driven as we can be. I mean, all of the data about Snowflake is in Snowflake. And, it sort of should be, obviously. It's an obvious thing. And so all of a sudden, I mean, I can ask any question, and really, it is fairly remarkable how easy it is in some senses to get some answers. And my engineers, when there's a problem with Snowflake, they run a query, and the system tells them a lot about what's going wrong. And yet, it's too hard. I mean, it's still too hard. And one of the things that I find exciting is that we've now taken a problem, which is the bottleneck associated with the data warehouse, and the challenges that require the scalability challenges, the performance challenges. I mean, all of these, the concurrency challenges, the ability to support multimodal types of data. We've taken all of those problems and effectively provide a solution for that within Snowflake. But what's fascinating to me is that it just shifts the problem to other places, right? And the issues have to do with how we're getting the data in and the resilience associated with those workflows, how we're doing analytics coming out of it, beginning to do predictive analytics, machine learning. Those are all the questions that are much more interesting, right? Those are really the interesting things that allow value to be created. And I think the industry as a whole still has some distance to go on that. And we think that we want to help. I mean, to us, we think there's an entire life cycle associated with data. We play a piece of it, but it's the entire ecosystem that makes it work. And as a whole, the ecosystem, we all have maturing to do. There's a lot of maturing opportunity.
And since you mentioned your career, just I guess provide more context to the audience. So you have a particularly storied history in the industry, right? You were at Microsoft for...
Stormy?
Stormy. You said it. You were at Microsoft for 23 years. I believe started as the first technical person on the SQL Server and became the president of the Server and Tools entire division. And then left to work with Juniper as VP.
A couple of years, yeah.
So what led you to becoming CEO of Snowflake? What was the... Well,
when I left, I joined Juniper. It was time for me to leave Microsoft. It was the right time. I'd worked directly for Steve. Ballmer's a fantastic guy in many ways, and I learned a lot from him. But it was definitely time to leave. And so I had to transition out of Microsoft. And I spent a couple of years at Juniper. And there were a couple of things about Juniper that were interesting. One was that, at least when I was there, Juniper's systems were relatively nascent in a lot of ways. So I learned a lot from Juniper about the importance. And in some ways, I was so spoiled at Microsoft in the fact that they were very good in general IT systems. And when I came to Juniper, there was definitely opportunities for that to improve. The company, by the way, is doing a lot of great stuff right now. They're actually one of our customers now, so I'll say that for sure. But they've come a long way. But one of the things I saw while I was at Juniper was that this cloud thing was just a massive disruption that was going to run across the entire industry. And large companies, large tech companies that have a history on premises were going to have a very rough time transitioning their business into a cloud environment. And with the ironic exception of Microsoft, and interestingly, there are a few others. Adobe's done a great job. There are a few companies that have done it, but companies like HP have obviously had a rough time, and we saw what happened with EMC. So I knew there'd be a lot of change, and that most of the interesting things that were happening outside of an Amazon, a Google, and a Microsoft were happening in smaller companies. And so I sought a company that was doing something super disruptive in the cloud. And data is such an incredible space. And when it became apparent to me that the founders of Snowflake had built a data warehouse that was designed with a completely different architecture that removed most of, if not all of the limitations that held back companies that were working with both traditional data warehouses as well as with big data and Hadoop. I realized that if this technology did what it was purported to do, this was 2014, that it would be incredibly disruptive. Now, I took a leap of faith because at that point in time, the product was just in early alpha and there were really no customers on it, and it had not been demonstrated at any level of scale. But from having spent a lot of time with the founders, it became clear that they knew what they were doing. And the architecture should work. And in fact, it does work. It works incredibly well. And so that's what led me to Snowflake, is the fact that it was a horizontal, disruptive technology emerging, that was completely cloud-based. And when I thought about what areas where there could be an impact on people with technology, at least on the enterprise side, it was hard to think about anything that could be more interesting than what we're doing at Snowflake.
Is there any history behind the name?
It's a simple history. Our founders liked skiing, and they were up at North Star. No, this is true. This is all true, right? Everybody's like, oh, it must be the Snowflake Schemo or whatever. I mean, and there's a million different stories. But the actual story was there were skiers and North Star, where they spent a lot of time, which is in California. Their logo is a snowflake, and it was that inspired the name. So.
Great. All right. So let's jump into use cases. Why do customers use you, and how? Is it a consolidation type scenario of several data marts? Or, is that a data lake type scenario?
Every story with a customer is different. I mean, I think you see customers coming from different places. We have some customers that are trying to make Hadoop work and are struggling with that to analyze machine-generated data. And so they come to Snowflake from the machine-generated side, and they use us for analytics associated with that. And those customers tend to think of us as kind of a big data solution. They're pretty much in the minority, though. I'd say there's quite a few of them, but most of our customers come to us from some sort of relational data warehouse that they have, which they want to have, which they're having some set of challenges with. Typically associated with the business teams not getting the performance or concurrency that they need, or the fact that the data is not able to be consolidated within a single system because of limitations associated with it. So they come to us from those two different directions overall. At first, we saw more people who were already experienced with the cloud and were looking for the scalability that Snowflake can offer and the concurrency. So our first and initial customers were really customers who already had experience in the cloud. They might already be running a database, a data warehouse in the cloud, and they were hitting limitations, and they wanted to eliminate those, and Snowflake solved the problem. Now, most of the customers that although that's still important, a lot of the customers that we're talking to are traditional enterprise customers that have a Netezza, Teradata, Oracle, Vertica, Greenplum, SQL Server. I mean, those are the five that are on premises. And for whatever reason, they're wanting to move off of that, and they're wanting to get and to adopt the cloud. And, they may keep that appliance around for some period of time, or they may, and they may run in some hybrid mode, but many of them are really on a long-term plan to consolidate all of their data in the cloud. And so they come from different places, but typically the driving factor is there's some level of dissatisfaction from a business team associated with limitations of their existing system, be that a Hadoop system or a traditional data warehouse.
So the Hadoop and Spark ecosystems, are friend or foe? Are they repositories that feed into Snowflake?
I think they're different. I think they're very different. I think what we're seeing is a movement of the open source community towards technologies like Spark, which are not storage oriented in their history. Hadoop's history with HDFS very much makes it a storage-based system. And then the typical approaches that people have traditionally used with Hadoop, variations of MapReduce, are now being seen, I think, as now that there are alternatives such as Snowflake that are available that allow you to work with large amounts of data and to do so with a true relational database. I think many customers who have previously tried Hadoop are moving towards a solution like Snowflake. So I think Hadoop is a past technology. I think it's although it's still people will still use it, it still has a place. I think it's not an area where there's going to be a lot of incremental additional investment. Spark is different. Spark, I think, is being used very, very broadly for advanced analytics, machine learning, in some cases for streaming data. And those scenarios are all very, very complementary to Snowflake. We have a lot of customers. We have a Spark connector, and we have a lot of customers that are running Spark in combination with Snowflake. And we think that's a pretty common scenario.
So speaking of potential foes at this time and competitors. So, presumably one of the reasons why you guys have raised this, formidable amounts of money is that you're head to head with some pretty big names.
Who would that be?
So starting with AWS. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels from my perspective that Redshift is probably the biggest competitor, and Redshift is an Amazon product. Meanwhile, I believe that you guys sit exclusively on AWS. How does that relationship work?
Well, I'm going to start by saying I think Amazon's been a very, very good partner of ours, and we work a lot with them. They're a great cloud provider. I mean, they've obviously been our cloud provider, and we like the technology a lot, and we get very good support from Amazon. So the team is great, and as I said, they've been a very good partner of ours. We do compete with Redshift. I think Amazon has 150 different services in their portfolio. We compete with maybe 3, depending on whether you want to include Athena and Spectrum in that. But Athena is kind of a different product anyway, and so really, I think the product that we compete with is Redshift. I mean, we've done a fair number of Redshift conversions, and that, in the early days in particular, what we saw was customers that wanted some of the scalability characteristics of Snowflake moving on to us, and we still see that. But more and more, we're working with Amazon to do those Teradata migrations, to do those Netezza migrations onto AWS, because those customers will be better served by a product like Snowflake running on Amazon. And I think that that's becoming more and more clear. It's certainly clear to our customers. I think it's becoming it's clear to, I think almost all of Amazon. The Redshift team might take exception to that, but I think almost everybody else at Amazon would agree that running Snowflake on Amazon and getting a customer like a Capital One successfully migrated onto AWS is a good thing for Amazon as well. So they've been a good partner. It's it's challenging at times. So there definitely is elements of competition.
What about the other guys? So Microsoft SQL Data Warehouse, Google BigQuery, IBM DB.
Yeah, I mean they're different in different senses. One of the things I will say is that we were born on Amazon, and Amazon's a fantastic partner to us. They're the leading cloud provider. We anticipate they'll be in that role, in that situation for the foreseeable future, perhaps in certainly through my career. We do hear customers that talk to us about other clouds. We do hear that, and as I've said, we've not made any announcements, and I'm not going to do that tonight. But I will say.
Sure?
What?
You sure?
Yeah. Well, this is like the worst kept secret in the planet, to be honest with you. But we're a customer-driven company, and as I say a million times, we're a values-based company. We put our first values. We put our customers first. Many customers. While Amazon remains the leader, the unambiguous leader, customers are choosing other clouds. When they choose a cloud, they care where their data is. It really matters to them that their data stays on that cloud. And so, we are getting requests for other clouds, and we hear them about Microsoft and Google. And so you'll see some things coming up in the future. And we see these people, we see the cloud vendors as partners, to be honest with you. There's a competitive element with all of them, but I think that they're partners of ours, and that's the way we'll operate.
Exciting. Okay. I guess there is in terms of where you sit in the ecosystem, are you going to continue to occupy that central place, or are you going to expand? I mean, there's a whole ecosystem of, I guess, ETL type technologies to get data into the warehouse, and then there's upstream, in terms of machine learning, analytics, all the things. Do you want to expand to that? Yeah, I guess what's the vision for the next 3 years?
I think you said it exactly right, though. There's a whole ecosystem here, and I think it's fair to say that where the data sits is kind of the center of that ecosystem. I think you said it exactly right. We like that spot. I mean, it's a nice place to start from, and we see ourselves staying very close to home. I think when we think about what can be done with a data warehouse, we don't have to think about ETL or ELT, nor do we have to think about BI and advanced analytics to do really meaningful things to drive opportunity forward for our customers and to just continue to add a boatload of value to our product. A really interesting example of this is, to me, when I think about where we're heading, the most interesting aspect of it has to do with global and cross-cloud. That, to me, is by far the most interesting place where we can make a difference. I said we're on Amazon today, and we're getting feedback about other clouds. So one of the biggest things is how can we help replicate data between systems, and ensure that companies are able to have their data and do analytics against their data where they want to. And if you talk to most large enterprises, I mean, they may say, we've chosen Amazon as our primary cloud provider, and we're in US East. But they're also in other regions around the world because they're a global organization. And they've also said, oh, and by the way, we want a multi-cloud strategy, and we've chosen, Microsoft as our other cloud. And so they're interested in ways where those gaps can be bridged. And a company like Snowflake is incredibly unique. It's uniquely and very well positioned to help solve those problems for customers. And so I don't have to think about, anything else outside of the scope of data warehouse to have about 500 person years of work to do to just meet the needs that both my customers are asking for, and then things like this global cross-cloud thing that I think is going to be very valuable.
Good, but just maybe to add something, and then that'll be the last question from me. I'll open it up to you guys right after this. But I read some interesting stuff about that you guys were doing some interesting stuff with machine learning and AI, both internally but also externally. Is that something you can talk about?
I'd say what we're doing mostly is frankly working with the ecosystem on machine learning. So we internally use R and Spark and things like that internally to do machine analytics. And we've many dozens of customers that are doing a similar thing. One of the things that we are doing, which is incredibly unique to Snowflake, which I think it goes hand in hand with global and will become very, very important to companies, is we're enabling data sharing between organizations. And what Snowflake can do, because of the architecture of Snowflake, it is possible for any organization to take data that they have and stored in Snowflake and securely and fully under their control in real time share it with another organization. And that organization can be another division within a company. And we have, if you look at all of our large customers, they're pretty much all using multiple accounts, Snowflake accounts, and doing data sharing between them as a way to allow the data to land in one place, but to structure the access to the data in a way that is most appropriate for the business. As a typical example of this, very typically, you might have production separated from test dev, put those two in two separate accounts and share data from production as appropriate to your tester and dev team so that they have access to this in a fully controlled way. But probably the most interesting thing of data sharing is the ability to share data with external organizations and to enable, effectively real-time access to data across organizational and company boundaries. And I think that together with global, because you need global to make data sharing work globally, which is I think the only way it's interesting, to be honest, is I think a real major shift in the way data will be used and accessed within organizations. So that I think that's a pretty major thing that we're doing that's pretty unique.
Absolutely. All right. Do we have questions? I think we have a microphone.
Hello. 子健, engineer from South Point. Hi, Bob.
Hi.
So what's your opinion about the trend of decentralized private data?
Decentralized what kind of data?
Private data.
Private?
Private.
So what do you mean? I'm sorry, I don't know what you...
So there's a new concept called decentralized AI. Basically, user keep their own private data, and each use their own private data train part of the model.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's early on this for sure. I think that things like data sharing can really help that in a lot of senses, because it's very typically the case where in order to get insight from data that I have some of, I need to be able to bring in data from other places, and data sharing could help in a case like that. But that's the one's a little early for me. So,
who has the mic? It's right behind you.
So you mentioned a lot about unstructured data and Hadoop. I was wondering, what are your thoughts about what Splunk does, and is that something that people can get away from if they start using Snowflake?
Yeah, when we've built Snowflake and talked to and focused on it, we've never focused really on Splunk or that data set. Our customers are starting to do that, and they're giving us requests to make Snowflake better. Like I got a request recently from a customer on a native TCP/IP data type, which is a great request, right? That's a great feature to have a data type that was native that natively understood the formatting of an IP address. So we're seeing that a lot more. The biggest thing I would say is that the technologies like Splunk, just like traditional data warehouses, were born on premises, and they were born with capabilities that were appropriate in an on-premises world. The engine underneath Splunk needs a refresh, and a product like Snowflake is a major refresh to something like that. And so I do think there's a tremendous opportunity for people to use Snowflake for data sets that traditionally they might have used Splunk for, although that was never the intent of where we were really focused on the product. But we're getting requests from customers for features and capabilities that would lend itself to that. And reading things like syslog data, for example, being able to bring syslog data in, and other proprietary data types. And there are many ways to do that pretty easily. I mean, some of our customers are taking a combination of, like, for example, Fluent together with Snowflake and using that as an alternative to other technologies like Splunk.
Wonderful. On this note, okay, maybe just speaker privilege here. We have about 2 minutes. I promise to release you by 7 p.m. at 6:58.
How has GDPR changed the way that either Snowflake or your customers are thinking about
Great
data?
question. GDPR, I think, is going to be have a gigantic impact for every company that operates internationally, and needs to take much more control of their data. It is, I think, going to drive a significant shift in the awareness, certainly within executives, of the importance of data security and data privacy. We'll see more tokenization of data and usage of tokens instead of actual PII data to limit the potential issues and breach issues and things. And we'll see data staying in Europe. And I mentioned the importance of global. I think that things like GDPR reinforce the importance of thinking of things in a global way, because you want to think about what data you leave in country and then what data that you'll export into countries like the United States. So I think it's a very major shift and something that every company is looking at or should be.
All right. On this note, Bob, first of all, congratulations on everything you guys have achieved over the last few years. Very excited for the future, and thank you so much for
Great. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.